So as a lot of you may know, the Assange case, although maybe you don't know, the Assange case is actually falling apart, which is a great thing.
The Assange case never really existed except in the fantasy land wherein it was made up to exist. So I'm just saying.
It's not something that could be sold through corporate media the way it used to be.
Correct.
And so now we're going to have the opportunity to speak with Kevin about this issue, because there's certainly a lot going on here that I'm not sure everybody realizes. And that also includes this. We're going to let Australia take over now. So without further ado, Kevin, welcome back to Generational Change.
Hi, Kevin.
Thrilled to have you. And the floor is yours, brother.
It's good to talk to you both. I mean, where to start? There's so much to say. Is there anything specific you wanted to?
Yeah, let's go back to, for people who don't know, just a quick update. We talked about it briefly last week, that the key witness in this case against Julian has since come forward and retracted his statement. And so then the question becomes, okay, now what? So I think like from that point on, I mean, look, we've known that this case is bogus all along, but as this has unfolded, where does the case stand now?
Yeah, so to this witness, which has been something that is significant, one of the reasons it's confusing for people is because the indictment in which Ziggy Tordarson is referenced was actually not widely reported in the press. So people don't fully understand what happened. And it's also a tad bit unusual the way the Justice Department prosecutors went about adding him into the indictment. And they added him into the indictment let me put it this way. They sourced allegations that they said were from him. And they did this like 7-8 weeks before the extradition trial, totally blindsiding Assange's legal team. They weren't prepared. They didn't have time to prepare witnesses for the extradition trial. In fact, the first day of the extradition trial, as I covered it, was spent telling the judge she needed to throw out all these new allegations that were put in the indictment because there wasn't proper notice given. And it was not fair to the accused to throw this in. There's a process to follow. It wasn't in the original extradition request packet, and all of a sudden they're springing these new allegations. It's not linked to any new charge. What they did is they were window dressing their computer crime conspiracy charge that has no basis at all. And the computer crime conspiracy charge is important to them because without it, then they are just prosecuting journalism. So they need the public to believe that Julian Assange is not a journalist and he's a hacker. That's what they're selling us through this third-rate prosecution that they're perpetrating on all of us. And they need us to believe this. So they go to this guy. Ziggy is someone, I don't know how much you've talked about him.
We don't know a lot about this particular witness. We don't. Yeah, please.
This guy is as dirty gets.
Yeah.
Well, so this is what I mean about like people didn't do the basic reporting on the indictment, and had they would have seen that there was a mention of a teenager one in the indictment, and it would have raised interest in the same way I was actually interested in this new indictment that there were alleged co-conspirators mentioned in the indictment, suggesting that the Justice Department has looked closely at people other than Julian Assange and contemplated cases against other staff members of WikiLeaks. We'll leave that for another conversation. So Ziggy is somebody who was a volunteer for WikiLeaks at one time when he was like 17 or 18 years old in Iceland. But he didn't really do a whole lot, and he spent his time inflating his importance, and essentially he embezzled $50,000 from the WikiLeaks store and was prosecuted for it in Iceland. He's been charged with several crimes, But what's fascinating to me, and what you may not know, is that the reason why we got this story about Ziggy recanting and saying that he no longer stood behind allegations that basically involve the suggestion that Julian Assange was trying to get him to help hack into Icelandic institutions of government and banking agencies, etc. I've lost my train of thought. The journalist who worked on this, Bjartmar Andersen, really good work. Talked to Ziggy for about 9 hours. The whole story started with the fact that he is apparently involved in these con artist schemes in Iceland, where he is buying products and then he's essentially like extorting companies for money and selling them products back to them. He's been accused of serious crimes in Iceland. He is also someone who's been convicted multiple times of sex with underage boys. In fact, I understand that one of the minors who made allegations did not make it into a case that was brought by Iceland, and it was so devastating that that young person committed suicide because they were not going to have their day in court to raise their claims against Ziggy. So this is the kind of damage that he's doing. He's a diagnosed sociopath, and I'm not just saying that in order to smear him. It's the process in Iceland, different from the United States, is you go through a mental evaluation, and if you're diagnosed as having sociopathy or psychopathy or however they term it, then you do not get a prison sentence. They deal with you differently, and so Ziggy has not gone to prison, and he's just convicted of all these crimes, and they continue to have crimes that they can bring against Ziggy Tordarson. He has this deal with the U.S. Justice Department or the FBI. It's an immunity deal. Whatever he tells the FBI, they're not going to pass it on to Iceland. And that's really important because Iceland actually kicked the FBI out of its country because somewhat connected to what we're just talking about here. They mentioned that there was a cyber intrusion against Iceland, and Iceland didn't have the resources or doesn't have a whole lot of law enforcement resources. The FBI said, hey, we could come to Iceland. We can help you out. Let us come there and we'll investigate. Once they got there, Iceland slowly figured out, or a minister slowly figured out, that they weren't investigating this cyber attack. In fact, they were just trying to collect intelligence and evidence against Julian Assange, to prosecute Julian Assange and to go after WikiLeaks. So they got kicked out. They were told that they were no longer allowed to be in Iceland. And they didn't leave right away, but a week later, they finally relented and left the country because they were unwelcome guests. So this to me speaks to the massive corruption that we have within the case. That's its significance to me. It's not significant so much because of the charge that it is with, because there's no single charge that Ziggy didn't lead the Justice Department to indict Julian Assange on additional charges. It just was added in, and actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense that it was added in there.
I was going to say that to you. It's sort of like they went and added this in to show basically a pattern of behavior for Assange. So it's not the exact case itself. So the case itself is having to do with the case with Chelsea Manning. And then this was sort of added in as, oh yeah, by the way, this goes to a pattern of behavior is why they allowed it. But what's interesting is that normally one additional incident does not a pattern of behavior make in terms of being allowed to be admitted as evidence. But what's so interesting is that they picked this guy with the credibility of crap to be this additional like story against Julian, and not even relative to the main case. So this is something, and I know this probably sounds crazy, but to me, what this says that this is current right now is that this is almost the way for the Justice Department to gracefully bow out of this and not have egg on their face and have it be like, okay, yeah, we just didn't have a good witness. And so maybe this is a good sign that all of this is being public now. I mean, what do you know, is that crazy talk?
Well, so to me, this is the only part of the indictment that is original Trump Justice Department work. Everything else in the indictment you can trace back to Eric Holder's Justice Department.
Right.
And you can say that this is evidence and this is investigative work that was done under I've always taken it, I believe you both probably take it too, that all of this work had always been done with the intent of destroying WikiLeaks as a media organization. That was the political intent behind it. That we could not allow this organization to exist as a challenger of U.S. power, and so they did all that work. But as is common in these conversations, and as you've heard before, they got to that New York Times problem. They recognized that they could not defend it in public. It's kind of like something Daniel Ellsberg says about information and transparency and how basically if you don't want leaks to inflict so much damage upon you, then you should stop doing those things in secret that you can't defend out in the open. Well, the same here is it's like, this prosecution it's something that they were doing and they were putting it together and they've been piecing it. And as people have become more knowledgeable about it and are aware of what's going on with prosecutors, none of them can defend it. Actually, you can't get a single Biden administration official to defend this case. You can't get Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to answer questions from foreign journalists who are questioning him while he's out in various countries doing his work. They don't want to talk about it.
You mean President Blinken? Sorry, I can't help it. He's really the president. He just is. But I am curious because one of the biggest reasons why this case has been allowed to fester has been the silence of corporate media and their refusal to even address this. I have particular ire for Jim Acosta, among other people, because if you remember when he was questioned about it, he wouldn't even address it. He basically was sheepish, trying to peddle a book about the integrity of the press. And when he was actually asked a question about real press integrity, he's like, yeah, I don't think I can answer that. Well, actually, the people who pay you don't want you to. That's what it's about. So I do think that corporate media plays a big role. How big a role do you think they play?
Yeah, so I have a complicated answer to this, just because of the way the media ecosystem works. On one hand, I benefit because corporate media doesn't want to have anything to do with this case, and they're not interested. Julian Assange loses out because they won't take it seriously and go beyond the editorial pronouncements that they put out. So just to be clear here, these corporate outlets that we're talking about, all of them have, for the most part, editors-in-chief who have come out and said, we oppose this prosecution. The problem is that they're not doing work on this case. They're not investigating it. They're not producing articles like Stundin in Iceland or El País in Spain did a fantastic series of articles on UC Global, the private security contractor that was accused of spying on Julian Assange while he was in the Ecuador embassy, targeting his legal team. There's a whole Spanish case that continues to unfold there, which you don't hear about at all in the press. In fact, what happened is, and this is actually referenced in the extradition decision, and it came up in the extradition trial, what you hear instead is that CNN took these materials that showed spying on a journalist and his legal team and people who were visiting him, excuse me, and they wrote an article for their website and to air about how this all confirms that Julian Assange is tied to Russia and all of that, which is not what El País took away from the materials. They took something completely different. They took away the news we needed to know, and they told us why it was crucial, because they were taking videos of him while he was living in the embassy, violating his privacy, highly intrusive. And it was all part of a pressure campaign to push him out of the Ecuador embassy. So you don't get this reporting. And when they do cover it, what they're doing is publishing columns or op-eds like WikiLeaks is not whistleblowing or WikiLeaks is not journalism. And with that, they're actually undermining their editor-in-chief's own pronouncements against the case, because you're actually laying down a foundation. You're creating a climate that makes it easier for the prosecutors to bring this case. You're making it easier for them to get away with going to the United Kingdom and asking the UK to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. And so that's their role, is basically that they become complicit in this case, because what they're choosing to publish is not information that educates us on the case. In fact, one of the complaints of well-known personality Katie Halper about what happened with the coverage of the Assange appeal is that the New York Times went ahead and made the headline, he's going to get transferred to Australia if he comes to the U.S. So nothing to worry about here. I mean, hey, you were concerned he was going to be tortured and abused in a U.S. prison. We solved it. He's just going to go to Australia to serve a sentence. So everyone just quit getting worked up about the show. Which is nuts. It's absolutely insane, because what the U.S. is actually admitting is that the U.S. prison system is so cruel and inhumane that it cannot extradite even criminals that are supposed to be extradited to the United States and put them in prison.
Right.
The actual real terrorists who we want to bring to justice, let's say hypothetically there's someone, they attacked and killed U.S. soldiers, and you need to extradite them from the UK. You can't, because they cannot prove that that person would not be tortured and treated inhumanely in a prison. So you can't just, hey, we solved it, he's going to Australia. No, I mean, Amnesty International is not buying it. They put out a really good statement saying why we shouldn't accept these assurances.
Kevin, can you talk about the danger of throwing the words like treason around and,
I love that. People have no idea what it means. None whatsoever.
Yeah.
Everything is treason if it's against your country. And it's like, no, there's actually very specific rules about that. So, yeah.
And the danger of it too, and this is the whole thing, because again, people won't keep Trump out of their mouths because it makes them money. That's it. Anyone who can't read the writing at this point, that the only reason Trump still gets talked about ad nauseum is because he gets clicks. That's it. So I think it's very important for people to understand just how again, this whole case is dangerous. This is a case that will be talked about long after we've left this earth. It's going to set precedent for a long time, and God willing, it'll end the right way. But if you could talk about just the danger of evoking such terms like treason when it comes to something like this and what that means.
Yeah, so just to make sure we come back to the fact that we started this conversation about it all falling apart. It's important to remind people along the way that Julian Assange is winning. I mean, it doesn't feel like winning because he isn't in prison, but I always, as I make my remarks about things that are extremely bleak, I always remind people that, he's actually in a better position because he's not appealing he's not appealing that the judge authorized the extradition to the United States, which would be, I think, at a much, much worse place for the Assange legal team. So you may not know this, but this is actually really interesting. Chelsea Manning when she was charged, faced an aiding the enemy offense. This goes to your question about treason and everything. Yeah. So she was charged with aiding the enemy in addition to the Espionage Act offenses. And what it amounted to is, part of it, the military prosecutors said, when the raid against Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan was conducted, we went in and we pulled out all these drives and left with these materials. And when we went through these hard drives, we found copies of WikiLeaks documents. So Osama bin Laden had asked for some WikiLeaks documents because he wanted to read about them as it applied to what he was doing on the battlefield. And so this was what they tried to sell to the judge. And in fact, Chelsea Manning was acquitted of the aiding the enemy offense, was not found guilty. And yet this was recycled. It's actually in Julian Assange's indictment. This narrative that is ludicrous, because clearly Osama bin Laden, his deputy, bin Laden deputy, just went online like us and found the documents. There was nothing, they don't give you evidence that she emailed someone in bin Laden's circle copies of these documents. They just say that somebody who's a terrorist downloaded documents that are available to every person in the entire world. And that's just to illustrate that we actually don't have anything to substantiate this idea that Chelsea Manning was a traitor. And since basically they're saying that Julian Assange is a co-conspirator, then he can't actually be found guilty of being a traitor either, because there's no evidence that either of them engaged in treason. But then, let's talk about this culturally and politically. The idea that what, Julian Assange did was treason. I mean, first off, he's not a U.S. citizen, so he doesn't owe this country anything. He can do whatever he wants, which means that he can choose whatever politician he wants to support, and he doesn't have to play the two-party politics game that we have to play as citizens. And if he wants to make a calculated decision that in the end backfires, and quite clearly, I'm sure he's had time to think about it, about how he was wrong. But if he wants to say that I think it's more likely in 2016 that Hillary Clinton will jail me than Donald Trump, then he can do that because he's not a U.S. citizen. And
Hillary Clinton didn't want to jail Julian Assange. She wanted to drone bomb him, and there is record of that. So I'm just saying, usually if a person says, can't we just kill this guy? Yeah, I'm probably more inclined to take anybody else who's not going to make a statement like that. But again, and I monitor Jen's social media very closely, and I got to tell you, it seems that even, the good news is that when you have a good reputation, it doesn't get very aggressive in the sense that people just think that you're just aiding the enemy. But what I have noticed is that overwhelmingly, if Jen is supporting Julian on social media, the dissent is always, well, he helped Trump. That's their excuse every time. There's nothing else. Yeah. Wow. He helped Trump, and I just can't accept that. And I'm just thinking, even if he did help Trump, he's a journalist. He's a journalist. That they're allowed to help whoever they want to help as long as it's not breaking the law. I mean, I don't know.
He didn't help Trump. Hillary Clinton helped Trump. Okay. Julian Assange just exposed it. So I'm so tired of this shoot the messenger thing. We do it with everything. It's absolutely absurd. And the treatment, and this is for all whistleblowers. This is the same stuff that was happening in Amazon when Chris Smalls complained about the conditions. He gets fired. So this is always shooting the messenger. Julian Assange is a hero. We should be building monuments to him. And the fact that this is still going on is ludicrous. So for anybody paying attention, we've been scrolling the DOJ comment line across the bottom of the screen. Please go on and leave them. It's a recording. Leave them a message. Tell them to drop the case against Julian Assange. I'm sorry, I digress.
No, it's definitely important. But there is a topic that I think is very important that we do cover in conjunction with what we are talking about. And obviously, we've seen just how out of sight, out of mind it has gotten with the bickering back and forth with, left media. But what Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian did to Aaron Mate is unforgivable as far as I'm concerned. I think it was not just reprehensible. I think it's something that should end their program, because when you go down that road, there is no road you won't go down for the right price. And that is the danger of being a journalist. People talk about, well, why didn't Assange just give up his source? And I'm thinking, because if Assange did give up his source, no matter how bad people may have wanted him to do that, that would have been it. No one would have been able to trust a reputable outlet ever again to release their information. There would never be another Pentagon Papers type situation or a WikiLeaks type situation. And for, Cenk and Anna to do what they did, especially Anna, I wish people would understand that you got to get Jimmy out of the conversation and just focus on what actually happened here. To attack a journalist in the fashion that they did, I mean, I have no words. I really don't. And I can only imagine, as a journalist like yourself, Jordan Chariton, who is a good friend of mine, friend of the show, obviously shared his sentiments in the same regard. We must protect people who are doing, as the honest work, the work that really matters, especially going out into the field. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, in the same way that I believe we should be clear about Julian Assange, and I don't ever say whether you think Julian Assange is a journalist or not, and then launch into what I have to say. And when I say Julian Assange is a journalist, it actually matters. It's important to the conversation. It's not something we should concede that it's debatable, because first off, it's factually incorrect that he isn't one, because he's a dues-paying member to the International Federation of Journalists. So, not that you need to have a card to be a journalist. A journalist is something it's an act you perform. You become a journalist when you perform the act of journalism.
You mean you didn't get your membership card? You didn't get your membership card? I got mine a long time ago. You need to get a card. There's a special card that you have to carry, and if you don't have it, you don't qualify. So I'm just telling you.
Yeah. No, I know Jim Acosta has one, and Luke Harding's got one too. It means you can lie about things that happened at the Ecuador embassy for the rest of your life and never lose your job at The Guardian. But yeah, so I think we should be clear. And there's not a whole lot more that needs to be said other than the fact that Aaron Mate, who has been a guest on my show, who I respect, who did award-winning work, digging into the investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who's done fantastic work staying on top of this thing that has gotten him smeared, the OPCW whistleblower revelations / OPCW scandal around whatever happened in Doma, Syria. He's owed an apology. He's owed an apology. And it was fair. It was fair for Jimmy Dore to demand an apology. I'll say that much. And there's really not much more that needs to be said. Obviously it's metastasized. It's now seems to bring in a whole lot of different players who have expressed their opinions. And then as people believe that those opinions are invalid, then it seems like we're piling on them and suggesting that they're not allowed to engage in the discussion. It's really unfortunate that certain people who have stepped forward to offer their opinions are just getting backlash for having a view about what went on between the two. But I mean, the basic thing is that he's owed an apology and he still hasn't gotten one. And I think it's fair for him to challenge Anna Kasparian and even Cenk until he gets an apology. And the other problem that they have, which they won't admit, is that they started this and they can't really end it until an apology is offered. So, it's pretty simple.
Maybe if he files a suit against them for slander, then maybe they'll consider retracting their statement, because the reality is that they were making some pretty serious accusations. Now, those of us in the reality world know that that's silly and that they have now fallen the way of, like, they might as well be QAnon as far as I'm concerned. But, it's like he actually could have a case if not for the fact that we know it's ridiculous, right? Like, but what they're saying are legitimate, like, first of all, factual and or not. So that's something that can be proven. So if you're going to call someone out as getting money from somewhere or being on the payroll of someone, then you need to back that up, and obviously they can't, because he doesn't, because this is ridiculous.
And I also do think, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I do think Aaron should sue. And the reason I think he should sue is because we have to put this Russiagate nonsense to bed. It has to go to bed. It has been this was a hatched conspiracy when WikiLeaks dropped the emails from the 2016 primary.
Yeah.
It was always going to be a distraction to make you look in the other direction of what was actually going on. And when you say, well, Aaron is paid by the Russians, that's slander.
Yes.
It's slander. And if you can't prove it, then you need to be made an example of. And they in particular should be made an example of, because so much of what they do is driven by money, no different than corporate media. Jimmy is a bull in a china shop. When he gets his mind set on something, he doesn't let it go, and he's not going to let it go, and he won't let it go until he, sees them basically, dead and buried. I hate saying it that way, but in a way, that's just kind of what it's come to at this point, because they're not going to apologize unless they're forced to. I just don't see that happening. And I think that the whole, again, we are huge fans of Kyle. I think, Secular Talk is one of the best shows that you're going to find. And I think he tried to do the best he could, in terms of a balancing act, but it's just gotten so far out of sight, out of mind at this point. And I do worry about the fracturing that's happening, because we really didn't get involved in any way in this whole mess. We went after Anna. We made her one of our bootlickers of the week, and rightfully so. But the whole drama that has been going on, and again, the reason why this is now really coming to a head is because Kyle just left TYT. He's no longer affiliated with them. And that is a big deal. And
I agree with our producer, John, who's saying, oh, God, we're still talking about this. I agree.
I just thought it was an important topic to bring up. But thanks for raining on my parade, because I'm
so sick of talking about Jimmy Dore. I'm so sick of hearing about him.
So then, Jen, you'll appreciate me forwarding the opinion of my dear friend, Rania Kalik, who says that, basically all these shows, I'm including my own show as well. We spent an hour talking about it one day, but we are all benefiting from this feud. And in fact, some of us, I believe, are monetizing this in a way that is actually distracting from some very real and important issues. So that's a view I simultaneously hold. I think Aaron has a right to do what he's doing, but let me just say, Aaron is fully capable of doing this independently without a lot of assistance from us. I think between Aaron and Jimmy, that they if anyone's going to extract through like a war of attrition, a retraction from Cenk and Anna, it's going to be them.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll mention, and Jen, you're probably not even aware of this, Anna went after Rania the other day. Basically tried to disqualify Rania as basically not doing real journalism, and that she needs to check her sources for the exact words that were used to describe the work that Anna has been doing, Rania has been doing with Breakthrough News. So the idea that, like I said, this isn't going to stop. That's one of the reasons why I felt that it was necessary to bring this up, because Aaron did initially say, yeah, I'm actually considering taking legal action, because they threw Assange under the bus, and now they're throwing Aaron under the bus, and now they're throwing Rania under the bus. I mean, at some point, you got to say this is really getting out of hand now. And it is dangerous. Like I said, that's the whole point. And that's the whole point about not speaking up in defense of Julian Assange, regardless of what you think of him as a person, regardless of where it falls politically. There is the slippery slope cannot be overstated in regards to protecting our First Amendment rights and the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. And that is really what's at hand here. And when I see these other groups, kind of going down that road, it's like, well, there it is. There's the slippery slope. And before you know it, you won't have any rights anymore.
Yeah. Well, so the problem is basically this tension that's been exposed where it's the group that's progressive left, except for anywhere outside the United States. It's just like what you see are these people who want to allow any sort of U.S. intervention and interference and meddling and regime change operations, and they aren't willing to question what the military and security agencies are doing in the way that Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning exposed. And that's how we bring it all back to the conversation in which we started, is that these people are profoundly uncomfortable, in the same way that let's just be really honest here. The same way that Bernie Sanders and AOC and some of the most beloved Justice Democrats are uncomfortable with having these conversations, because it just is something in which they can be smeared like this. We see it. And in fact, it's really sad, because what they're doing is exactly what you get from being on corporate media. You would expect for Aaron Mate to go on CNN and be smeared in this way. You would hope that people who were holding themselves out as progressive media would not deploy the same kind of smears.
I think the best way to wrap up the conversation is to basically bring it all the way back to, what is going to be the ultimate result now at this point. I mean, is it really just a matter of time, as far as you can see it, that this is really just a case that they're just going to try to let die without any, basically with a whimper, just like no one's even going to know it happened. They're just going to, there may be some statement that is put out there. I mean, obviously anyone who has been supporting this issue is going to make a very, very loud statement about it. If ultimately, he's allowed to return to Australia, and whether the charges are dropped or how they're dropped. But where do you see this going? And do you see any type of a time frame at this point?
Yeah, so the U.S. did get granted an appeal, but I didn't get a chance to say very quickly here that they weren't able to contest medical evidence that was given by doctors. They wanted to challenge the credibility of medical experts and say that Julian Assange, if he was in a prison, would not do it because he has a psychiatric condition. And the High Court of Justice said, no, you're not going to challenge the credibility of these experts. The judge did this appropriately. And so now we've got a hearing that's going to come up in the fall, probably, let's say October. And then that will be a few days. And after that is completed, then Julian Assange will find out if the U.S. government wins. And then it's, it's back in the hands of the Justice Department. Are they going to appeal to the next level? Are they going to take this to a Supreme Court in the UK? So at any moment, as you're telling everyone to call the Justice Department, Biden can drop these charges. Merrick Garland can drop these charges.
Yes.
That's the plain ask. That's all they have to do. But it is the reality is they are on the losing end. They are losing, and they're not just losing. They're not just losing in the Assange case. They're losing in the entire globe, because here's another thing. They are empowering dictators, because dictators of the world are being interviewed by journalists. And as they raise concerns about press freedom in their own countries, those dictators are saying, so what? How dare you ask me about this? The British government is allowing a journalist to be imprisoned in Belmarsh. And if an American journalist asks the leader of Azerbaijan, or if someone asks the foreign minister of China about press freedom in their country, they say, don't lecture us on this. Julian Assange is in a prison right now. So we don't have any credibility to tell anybody anything about how they should treat people right now, because we actually have journalists in jail. And so that's why they, if they won't do it because it's wrong, then they should at least do it for the brazen purpose that is making it harder to function as an empire.
If nothing else, I think I just learned for the first time how to say Azerbaijan. What was it? Say it again.
Azerbaijan.
Yes. And I have looked at that for like most of like that I've ever seen it. And I'm like, I don't even try. Azerbaijan. Thank you. That was very informative. Most people have no idea what that is, but
it's a country.
Yeah, well, I know it's a country, but most people have never heard of it. Couldn't even tell you what continent it's on. I know exactly where it is. I just couldn't have pronounced it, but I'm sorry.
Kevin, where can everybody find you and your work?
I actually have a project of shadowproof right now called The Dissenter, thedissenter.org. And if you subscribe, you can get access to, it's free. So you can get access to the journalism I'm doing on the Julian Assange case, as well as other whistleblower cases. We don't have time for it right now, but I'm following things like the drone whistleblower Daniel Hale's case, who he's charged under the Espionage Act and will be sentenced at the end of July. So this is a resource for doing the kind of reporting we don't see in the establishment press.
No, I think it's awesome. And just like how we've talked before, Peter, about how, people have their niche, like Jordan really focuses on like domestic issues that have to do with like, the water and stuff like that. You guys, Kevin is someone who really focuses on whistleblowers and people that are getting prosecuted for speaking truth to power. And this is really important. And I think it's really special that you I know you do other stuff too, but that it's such an important topic that other people are not covering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
Kevin Gosztola of Shadowproof, friend of the show, and he is a real journalist. And we are really appreciative that you came on tonight, and we certainly look forward to having you again on soon, my friend.
Thanks, Kevin.
Well, thank you. You have a good night. Bye.
Take care, buddy.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.